The Harley's engine
Smells
rumbled like
incredible
distant
as
thunder across the
always.
Arizona
Thanks, dear.
desert.
The usual?
You know it,
6:15 in the
Tell me.
morning, and the highway stretched
It's
empty
okay.
before
I'm
Clayton
here to help.
Blackwell.
I know.
Nothing
Thank
but
you.
asphalt,
We'll get
sky,
through
and the
this.
promise of coffee
Together.
that his mother had been brewing at the same time in the same pot for 40 years. 63 years old, silver hair whipping back from a face carved by wind and time. 220 pounds of muscle gone softer at the edges, but still solid where it counted. The kind of man who looked like he'd been hewn from the same red rock that lined this highway. His boots, scarred leather, steel-toed older than some men's marriages, rested easy on the pegs. The 1998 Fat Boy beneath him wasn't the fastest bike on the road anymore. But then Clayton wasn't the fastest man either. Fast was for young fools who hadn't learned that staying power beats speed every single time. He'd learned that lesson in blood and bruises back when his hair was black and his knuckles were always split. The sunrise painted the desert in shades of rust and gold. Beautiful if you were the kind of man who noticed such things. Clayton noticed. 16 years of quiet mornings had taught him to see what he'd missed during 30 years of chaos. 16 years since he'd walked away from the Hells Angels. 16 years since he had traded his patch for peace. 16 years of keeping his head down, his hands busy and his past buried so deep that most days he could almost forget the weight of it. Almost. The wind carried the smell of creosote and dust. Somewhere overhead, a hawk circled patient, watchful, waiting for something small and careless to make a mistake. Clayton understood that patience, had lived by it. The difference between a young man and an old one wasn't strength. It was knowing when to strike and when to circle. His mother had taught him that before the Hells Angels had taught him everything else. Rosie Blackwell, 85 years old and tough as the desert she'd called home for 6 decades. She'd raised Clayton alone after his father came back from World War II with wounds that never showed on the outside. Raised him in a 2-bedroom house that should have broken apart in the wind, but somehow never did, held together by her will and her work ethic and her absolute refusal to let the world break what was hers, including her son, even when he tried his damnedest to break himself. The Copper Ridge exit sign appeared on his right. Population 3,000, 1 main street, 2 traffic lights, the kind of town where everybody knew your name, your business, and your grandfather's middle name. Clayton had hated places like this when he was young, too small, too quiet, too much like being buried alive. Now at 63, it felt like the only place he could breathe. He downshifted as he took the exit, the Harley's engine dropping to a lower growl. The sound echoed off the rock formations flanking the road, coming back to him like a conversation with ghosts. Main Street appeared ahead, still mostly dark. A few early risers, old-timers like himself who'd given up on sleep years ago, moved behind lit windows. The hardware store, the salon, the post office that doubled as a gathering place for anyone over 70 who wanted to complain about their backs and their government in equal measure. And there at the corner of Main and Oakwood, the lights burning bright and warm in the pre-dawn darkness, Rosie's Diner. Clayton felt something in his chest ease the way it did every morning when he saw those lights. His mother awake before the world, doing what she'd done for 40 years. Making coffee, flipping pancakes, offering the kind of comfort that came on a plate with 2 eggs, hash browns, and toast that actually had butter, not that margarine garbage. The diner had been here longer than most of the people in Copper Ridge. Rosie had bought it in 1986 with money she'd saved working 2 jobs, waitress by day, cleaning offices by night. Clayton had been 23 then, already deep into the life with the Hells Angels, already starting to wear violence like a second skin. She'd never asked him where he got the $5,000 he'd given her for the down payment. Never asked about the split knuckles, or the bruises, or the phone calls that came at 3 in the morning. She'd just taken the money, kissed his cheek, and said, "When you're done being stupid, there'll always be pancakes." It had taken him 24 more years to get done being stupid. Clayton pulled the Harley into the spot he'd claimed 16 years ago, right out front, where his mother could see it from the kitchen window, where she could know he was safe, even if safe was a relative term for a man with his history. He killed the engine. The sudden silence felt thick, heavy, with something he couldn't name. The morning was too quiet. He sat there for a moment, hands still on the grips, that old instinct, the one that had kept him alive through 100 bad situations, whispering in the back of his mind. Something's wrong. He'd learned to listen to that whisper. The men who didn't listen were the ones who ended up in the ground before their time. Clayton swung his leg over the bike, his knee protesting the movement. 63. Old enough that his body kept a ledger of every stupid thing he'd ever done, and the bill came due every morning. He stood there on the sidewalk, studying the diner through narrowed eyes. The lights were on. The open sign glowed red in the window. Through the glass, he could see the familiar interior red vinyl booths, white Formica counters, the kind of checkerboard floor that had been popular in the 50s and never quite went away in places like this. But no customers. At 6:30 on a Thursday morning, there should have been at least 3 trucks in the parking lot. Old man Hutchinson, who ran the hardware store and had been getting coffee here since before Clayton was born. The Sterling woman from the salon. Maybe one of the ranch hands from the properties outside town. Empty. The whisper in his mind got louder. Clayton crossed the sidewalk in 3 strides. The door chime rang as he pushed inside that same bell that had been there for 40 years, cheerful and bright, and completely wrong for the feeling in his gut. "Morning, Ma," he called out, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. No answer. The coffee was brewing. He could smell it, that rich, dark scent that meant his mother had been up since 5. The grill was on the surface, clean and ready. Everything in its place the way Rosie ran things. Order, routine. The comfort of knowing that some things never changed. Except his mother wasn't behind the counter. May Clayton moved deeper into the diner, his boots loud on the checkerboard floor. Past the first booth to the second, around the counter to where the kitchen window opened up where Rosie usually stood, with her spatula in one hand and a coffee pot in the other, ready to fill cups and flip eggs and tell you that you look like hell and should eat more vegetables. She was there, standing with her back to him, shoulders hunched in a way that made her look small, and Rosie Blackwell had never looked small in her entire 85 years. "Ma, you okay?" She turned around, and Clayton's world tilted sideways. Her left eye was swollen, nearly shut the skin around it, a deep, ugly purple-black. Her cheek bore the distinct outline of knuckles, someone's hand large and brutal stamped into her face like a signature. Her lower lip was split, a dark line of dried blood cutting down to her chin. Her right hand was wrapped in a dish towel held awkward against her ribs. For 10 seconds, Clayton couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at the woman who'd raised him, who'd fed half the town, who'd never hurt a soul in her entire life, standing there with violence written across her face in bruises and blood. The coffee cup in his hand, when had he picked up a coffee cup, slipped from his fingers. It shattered on the floor. Neither of them moved. "Ma!" His voice came out wrong, too quiet, too calm, the kind of calm that came before hurricanes. "Who did this to you?" Rosie's good eye, her right one still clear and blue, despite 85 years, met his. And in that eye, Clayton saw something that scared him more than the bruises. Fear. His mother, who'd stared down drunk men twice her size, who'd run a diner in a rough town for 40 years and never backed down from anyone, who'd raised a son who became a Hells Angels president and never once flinched. She was afraid. "Nobody," Rosie said, her voice thin, shaking. "I fell in the kitchen. It's nothing. Ma, it's nothing, Clayton." She turned away, moving too careful, like her ribs hurt. "Let me get you coffee. Pancakes? You want pancakes?" Her hands shook as she reached for the coffee pot. Clayton moved before he thought about it, crossing the space between them in 2 strides. Gentle, he'd learned gentle late in life, but he learned it. He took the coffee pot from her hands and set it down. "Ma, look at me." She wouldn't. "Ma, please." Finally, slowly, she raised her eyes to his, and Clayton saw tears there, held back by sheer force of will. His mother, who'd cried exactly twice in his memory, once when his father died, once when Clayton had showed up at her door 16 years ago, covered in blood that wasn't his, and told her he was done with the life. "Who hit you?" Each word came out like a hammer strike. Rosie's mouth trembled. "Clayton, please, don't ask me that. Ma, please." Her voice broke. "Don't ask me, because if I tell you, you'll do something, and I can't lose you again. I can't watch you go back to being that man. That man, the man who'd ruled a chapter of the Hells Angels with an iron fist and a willingness to do violence that scared even the men who rode beside him. The man who'd broken bones and burned bridges and built a reputation that still made old-timers in Arizona lower their voices when they said his name. Steele Blackwell. He'd buried that man 16 years ago. But standing here looking at his mother's battered face, Clayton felt something old and dark uncurl in his chest. Felt that man, that young, angry, dangerous man, lifting his head after a long sleep. The door chime rang. Both of them turned. Rita Sanderson stood in the doorway, 50 years old and soft around the edges, wearing her waitress uniform, the same pink dress she'd been wearing for 15 years. She'd worked at Rosie's diner almost as long as Rosie had owned it. Good woman, hard worker, the kind of person who remembered your order and your birthday and asked about your kids by name. She took one look at Rosie's face and went pale. "Oh God," Rita whispered. "Rosie, I told you not to come in today. I could have covered." "I'm fine," Rosie said too quick. "Just clumsy." "Rosie, I'm fine, Rita." Rita's eyes cut to Clayton, and in that look he saw everything he needed to know. She knew. She knew who did this, and she was terrified. "Rita." Clayton's voice was soft, gentle, the way you talk to a spooked horse. "What happened here?" "I don't." Rita's hand went to her throat. "I don't know what you mean." "Rita." "Steel Eye." She backed toward the door. "I should go. I have to. My shift doesn't start until 7. "Rita Sanderson." Clayton didn't move, didn't raise his voice. "You've known me 16 years. Have I ever hurt you? Ever given you reason to be scared of me?" "No," Rita whispered. "But this is different. Tell me what happened." "I can't." "Why?" "Because," Rita's eyes filled with tears. "Because they said if anyone talked, they'd come back. And next time it wouldn't just be—" She cut herself off, hand over her mouth. But she'd said enough. They, next time, come back. This wasn't random. This wasn't some drunk wandering in off the street. This was planned, deliberate. Someone had come into his mother's diner, the safest place in Copper Ridge, the place where old men argued about politics and young mothers brought their babies for pancakes, and they'd put their hands on an 85-year-old woman. Clayton felt his heart rate slow down, felt that old familiar calm settle over him like a blanket, the calm that came before action, the calm that had made men twice his size back down when they saw it in his eyes. "Rita," he said, his voice perfectly level. "Go home. Take the day off. Paid. Steal. Go home. Lock your doors. Don't answer if someone knocks unless you know them." Rita stared at him, then slowly she nodded. She looked at Rosie, a long, meaningful look that said everything words couldn't, and then she was gone, the door chime ringing behind her. The silence in the diner felt like something physical. Clayton turned to his mother. "Ma, I need you to tell me everything." "Clayton, please. Everything. Right now." Rosie's shoulders sagged. She looked older than 85 in that moment, looked tired, looked beaten in a way that had nothing to do with the bruises on her face and everything to do with the weight she'd been carrying alone. "3 months ago," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "A man came, suit and tie, showed me papers, said a company wanted to buy the diner." Clayton waited. Crimson Development, they called themselves. Made an offer, $150,000. The diner was worth at least 5 times that, maybe more given the location, corner lot, Main Street, the kind of property developers dreamed about. "I said no," Rosie continued. "This place, it's all I have, all I built. I won't sell it to some company that's just going to tear it down and put up something chrome and plastic." "What happened then?" The man smiled. Said I should think about it, that these opportunities don't come twice. Rosie's good hand twisted in her apron. "He came back 2 weeks later, same offer. I said no again. And a week after that, someone broke the front window, 2 in the morning, just," she made a gesture, "threw a brick through it. The sheriff came, took a report, said it was probably kids." Clayton's jaw tightened. Sheriff Wade Thornton. They'd been drinking buddies for 10 years. Every Friday night, bourbon and complaints about their backs and their government. "Kids," Clayton repeated. "That's what Wade said." Rosie wouldn't meet his eyes. "Then last month, someone slashed my tires. All 4. Same night as the window." Wade said, "Kids." "Yes. And you didn't call me." "What were you going to do?" Rosie looked up at him, and the fear in her eyes was mixed with something else now. Resignation. "What could you do that wouldn't make it worse?" Fair question. The old Clayton Steele Blackwell would have made it worse. Would have found whoever did it and made them wish they'd never been born. But he wasn't that man anymore. "Was he? When did they hit you?" Clayton asked. Rosie's hand went to her face, touched the bruise so gently it was like she was afraid it might spread. "Last night, after closing. I was counting the register. The back door, I thought I locked it. But—" Her voice broke. Clayton weighted every muscle in his body tight with the effort of staying still, staying calm, not putting his fist through the nearest wall. "He was just there, in the kitchen. Big man, taller than you, wearing a black jacket." Rosie's breathing had gone shallow, rapid. He said I had 24 hours to reconsider the offer. That the company was being generous, but generosity had limits." "What did you say?" "I told him no. I told him this diner was mine and I wasn't selling." A ghost of her old fire flickered in her good eye. I told him to get out or I'd call the police. And he hit you. Yes. The word was so small. He hit me. And then he said that if I called the police, if I told anyone, the next time would be worse. He said her voice dropped to a whisper. He said that old women have accidents all the time. Falls, fires, things that look natural. Clayton felt something snap inside him. Not break. Break was too loud, too obvious. This was quieter, like ice forming over a river, like steel being tempered in a forge. Did he say his name? No. Would you recognize him? Yes. Rosie looked at him, and in her eyes, Clayton saw a reflection of himself. Clayton, I'm scared. Not for me, for you, because I know that look on your face. I've seen it before. What look? The look that says you're about to do something stupid, something that'll bring that life back to your door. You promised me 16 years ago that you were done with violence. I am. You're lying. She was right. Clayton reached out, touched her bruised cheek so gently that she barely felt it. Ma, that promise, that was about me not going looking for violence. This is different. How? Because violence came looking for you. He turned and walked toward the door. Clayton, wait. He didn't wait. The morning air hit him like cold water. 6:45 now, and the sun was fully up, painting Copper Ridge in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful. Peaceful. A lie. Clayton stood on the sidewalk, his hands in his pockets, his breathing slow and measured. Around him, the town was waking up. Trucks pulling into the hardware store, the salon's lights flickering on. Old man Hutchinson walking past with his head down, not meeting Clayton's eyes. Everyone knew. The whole damn town knew that someone was putting pressure on the businesses. Knew that an 85-year-old woman had been beaten in her own diner, and everyone was too scared to say a word. Clayton pulled out his phone, one of those simple flip models that the kids laughed at, but worked just fine, and dialed a number he hadn't called in 3 years. It rang 4 times. Then, "This better be good. You know what time it is." The voice was rough as gravel, worn down by cigarettes and whiskey and 66 years of hard living. "Razor," Clayton said. "It's Steel." A pause. Then careful. "Steel. Hell, brother. Thought you fell off the earth. Need a favor. Name it." That was the thing about the old days, the brotherhood. You could go years without talking, but when you called, the answer was always the same. Name it. "There's a company," Clayton said. "Crimson Development, LLC. Out of Phoenix. I need to know who owns it, who runs it, and what they're really doing. That all. And I need it yesterday." Razor was quiet for a moment. Then, "This business or personal?" "Personal." "How personal?" "They put their hands on my mother." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. "Jesus," Razor finally said. "Steel, I'm sorry. What do you need?" "Information first, then we'll see." "I'll make some calls. Give me a few hours." "Thanks, brother." "Steel?" Razor's voice went serious. "You thinking about going back to the old ways?" "No." "You're lying." Everyone could tell when he was lying today. "Maybe," Clayton admitted, "but I'm trying not to." "Try harder. You worked too damn hard to get out." A pause. "But if you need backup, I know where to find you." Clayton ended the call and stood there, phone in his hand, staring at the diner. Through the window, he could see his mother moving behind the counter. Slow, careful, favoring her ribs. Still making coffee. Still getting ready for the breakfast rush, even though her face was a mask of bruises and her hands were shaking. 85 years old, and she wouldn't quit. Wouldn't bend. Wouldn't sell her life's work to thugs in suits. She'd taught him to be stubborn. Taught him to stand his ground. And now that stubbornness was going to get her killed. Unless he did something about it. Clayton walked to his Harley, bent down, and opened the saddlebag on the right side. He kept emergency supplies there, first aid kit, tire patch kit, the usual road necessities. But buried underneath, wrapped in an oilcloth, was something he hadn't touched in 16 years. His fingers found it by muscle memory. He pulled out the package, unwrapped it there on the sidewalk in the morning light. The Hells Angels patch, Tucson chapter. President's rocker, worn and faded, but still readable. Underneath it, cold and heavy, a Colt 1911. His father's gun carried through World War II, given to Clayton on his 18th birthday. He'd sworn 16 years ago that he'd never wear the patch again. Never pick up the gun again. But standing here with his mother's blood dried on her apron and her fear settling like a weight in his chest, some promises were made to be broken. Clayton wrapped the patch and gun back up, tucked them into his jacket. Then he walked back into the diner. Rosie was at the grill cracking eggs, one-handed, her movements automatic from 40 years of practice. "Ma!" She didn't turn around. Your pancakes will be ready in 5 minutes. Ma, look at me. Slowly she turned. Saw something in his face that made her go still. No, she whispered. Clayton, no. You promised. I know. Please, don't do this. Don't go back to being... I'm not going back to anything, Clayton said. I'm going forward, and anyone who puts their hands on you, they're going to learn what happens when you mistake quiet for weak. Clayton, eat your breakfast, Ma. Lock the doors after I leave. Don't open them for anyone you don't know. Where are you going? Clayton headed for the door. Over his shoulder, he said, to have a conversation with the sheriff. The door chimed as he walked out. Behind him, he heard his mother's voice, small and scared. Clayton Blackwell, you come back here? But he was already gone, the Harley's engine roaring to life, the sound echoing down Main Street like a warning. Like a promise. Like the first rumble of thunder before a storm that's been building for 16 years finally breaks. Underscore, 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 underscore. The sheriff's office sat 2 blocks from the diner, a squat brick building that had been old when Clayton was young. Sheriff Wade Thornton's truck was parked out front, a newer model, Clayton noted. Nice truck, probably cost $40,000. Interesting for a man who made $50,000 a year. Clayton killed the Harley's engine and sat there for a moment, studying the building. Lights on in Wade's office. The man was an early riser, always had been. That was one thing they'd had in common back when they were friends. Back before this morning. Clayton dismounted his boots loud on the pavement. 7 in the morning now, and the heat was already building. Arizona in August. The kind of heat that made men's tempers short and their judgment shorter. Perfect. The door to the sheriff's office wasn't locked. Clayton pushed through into air conditioning that fought a losing battle against the desert outside. The front desk was empty. Donna, the receptionist, didn't start until 8. Wade's office door stood half open. Clayton walked to it, knocked once. It's open, Wade called. Clayton pushed the door wide. Sheriff Wade Thornton sat behind his desk, coffee in one hand, reading glasses perched on his nose, looking at some paperwork that probably didn't matter to anyone but him. 59 years old, gray hair, cut military short, the kind of lean build that came from running every morning before the sun came up. They'd been friends for 10 years. Bourbon on Fridays, war stories, Wade's from the Gulf War, Clayton's from the streets, the comfortable silence of men who'd seen enough violence to appreciate peace. Wade looked up, smiled. Steele, early even for you. Coffee? No. Something in Clayton's voice made Wade's smile falter. He set down his cup, removed his reading glasses. What's wrong? My mother. Rosie, is she okay? No. Clayton stepped into the office, closed the door behind him. She's not okay. She's got a black eye, split lip, and what I'm guessing are cracked ribs from where someone hit her last night. Wade went very still. What? You heard me. Jesus. Wade stood up. Did she file a report I didn't see? She didn't file a report because the man who hit her told her not to. Told her that old women have accidents. Wade's face had gone pale. Steele, I swear to God I didn't know. Didn't know what, Wade? The question hung in the air between them. Wade sat back down slowly. His eyes wouldn't meet Clayton's. I didn't know anyone got hurt. But you knew something was happening. Silence. Wade, we've been friends for 10 years. I've drunk your bourbon. I've listened to you complain about your ex-wife and your bad knees and your pension that won't be enough to retire on. Clayton's voice was still calm, still quiet. So I'm going to ask you one time. What do you know about Crimson Development? Wade's jaw tightened. Steele. One time, Wade. The sheriff looked at him, then really looked at him, and whatever he saw in Clayton's eyes made him slump in his chair. It's complicated, Wade said finally. Uncomplicated. Wade rubbed his face with both hands. When he spoke, his voice was tired. 3 years ago, I got a call from a lawyer in Phoenix. Said he represented some investors who were interested in developing Copper Ridge. Wanted to know if the town would be receptive. And you said, I said it depended on what they wanted to develop. Wade looked down at his hands. They said they wanted to revitalize downtown, bring in businesses, maybe a resort. Said it would be good for the town. More jobs, more tax revenue. And I said I'd talk to people, see what the town thought. Wade's voice had gone flat. They were very grateful. Sent a gift basket. A gift basket. At first, Wade met Clayton's eyes. Then it was tickets to a Cardinals game. Then a weekend in Sedona. Then, he stopped. Then what? Then they asked me to help smooth the way, make sure property owners understood the benefits of selling, make sure any obstacles were handled quietly. Clayton felt his hands curl into fists. And you said yes. My daughter was in college. Sarah. You met her, remember, sweet kid. Wanted to be a doctor. Wade's voice was hollow. Tuition was 60 grand a year. I had maybe 10 grand saved. She was going to have to drop out. So they paid. They paid, and all I had to do was... Wade stopped, swallowed hard. All I had to do was make sure nobody made waves. If someone complained about vandalism, I'd say it was kids. If someone got scared, I'd tell them there was nothing I could do. And when they started beating old women, I didn't know. Wade's voice cracked. Steele, I swear to God, I didn't know they'd go that far. They said it was just business, just property development. They said no one would get hurt. Well, someone did. Wade looked at him. I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry. If I'd known, you would have what said no refused the money. Clayton's voice was still quiet, still calm, but underneath it was something Wade had never heard before. Something cold and sharp and absolutely merciless. You've been taking their money for 3 years, Wade, helping them terrorize people who've lived here their whole lives. And you're going to sit there and tell me you didn't know? I didn't think. No, you didn't think. You just cashed the checks. Wade's face went red. Don't you judge me, Steele. You of all people. I know what you were. I know what you did with the Hells Angels. How many people did you hurt? How many lives did you ruin? More than I can count, Clayton said quietly. That's why I quit. That's why I spent 16 years trying to be someone different. He leaned forward, hands on Wade's desk. But you were supposed to be the good guy, the law, the man people trusted to protect them. I am protecting Am. You're protecting your wallet. Wade stood up, his face flushed with anger and shame. Get out of my office. Not yet. I need names. I don't have names. Wade, I can find out the hard way or the easy way. The hard way involves me going to Phoenix, kicking doors, and asking questions that'll make people nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. Mistakes attract attention. The kind of attention that might lead back to sheriffs who take bribes. Wade stared at him. Are you threatening me? I'm asking you to do the right thing. For once. Silence. Then Wade sat down, opened a drawer, pulled out a folder. He slid it across the desk. Clayton opened it. Inside, property records, sales agreements, all signed by different people, but all transferring ownership to Crimson Development, LLC. 8 properties total. Every single one downtown Copper Ridge. They're buying up the whole block, Wade said quietly, planning to tear it all down. Build some kind of casino resort. Got approval from the State Gaming Commission 6 months ago. Clayton's finger traced the list of properties. The hardware store, the salon, the old movie theater that hadn't shown a film in 20 years, but still stood proud. And there at the bottom, Rosie's Diner. The last holdout. Who do they send to do the dirty work? Clayton asked. Wade hesitated. Wade. His name is Kane. Vincent Kane. Used to be an enforcer for the Mongols MC out of California. Did time for assault, got out 5 years ago. Works for Crimson now as their... Wade searched for the word. Problem solver. Where do I find him? Steele don't. Where do I find him? Wade looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up a pen, wrote an address on a Post-it note. Trailer park outside town. Space 14. He handed over the note. Steele, listen to me. Kane's not like the punks you used to fight. He's dangerous, professional. So am I. Not anymore. You've been out of the life for 16 years. You're 63 years old. Old enough to know better. Young enough to still do damage. Clayton turned to leave. Steele. He looked back. Wade's face was a mask of regret and fear. I'm sorry. About Rosie. About all of it. If I could take it back. You can't. Clayton's voice was flat. But you can help me fix it. How? By doing your job. For once. Clayton walked out, leaving the sheriff sitting alone in his office, the folder of property records spread out on his desk, like evidence of his own corruption. Outside, the sun was higher now, the heat building. Clayton stood beside his Harley, the Post-it note in his hand, Kane's address, burning into his vision. 16 years of peace. 16 years of quiet. 16 years of pretending the past was buried. And it had taken one morning, one look at his mother's battered face to bring it all roaring back. Clayton climbed onto his bike, started the engine. The Harley's rumble echoed down the empty street. And somewhere in the back of his mind, that old voice, the one that belonged to Steele Blackwell, president of the Hells Angels, the man who'd ruled through fear and violence, whispered soft and cold welcome back. Clayton gunned the throttle and rode toward the trailer park, toward Vincent Kane, toward answers that he'd get one way or another. Behind him, Copper Ridge sat peaceful in the morning sun. But the storm was coming, and when it hit, the whole town would remember what it meant to wake a man who'd spent 16 years learning how to be gentle. Because gentle wasn't the same as weak, and mercy had limits. His mother's bruised face flashed in his mind. Those limits had just been reached. The trailer park sat at the edge of Copper Ridge like a scab on the desert's skin. 32 mobile homes arranged in crooked rows, most of them older than Clayton, held together by rust and stubbornness and the desperate hope that the next windstorm wouldn't be the one that finally tore them apart. He'd been here before years ago, back when he was still wearing the patch, still collecting debts for the club. A meth cook had holed up in space 27 thinking distance from Tucson would keep him safe. It hadn't. Clayton killed the Harley's engine 3 spaces down from number 14. Close enough to see far enough to have options if things went sideways. And things always went sideways. The sun was fully up now, 8:30 in the morning, and the heat was already brutal. The kind of heat that made the air shimmer and turned metal too hot to touch. A few residents were out, an old woman watering dead plants, a shirtless man working on a truck that probably hadn't run in 5 years. They looked at Clayton, then looked away quick. People out here knew how to mind their business. Space 14 was a single wide from the 80s, once white, but now more the color of old bones. A black pickup truck set out front, newer model, expensive. Too expensive for this neighborhood. Clayton dismounted, stretched his back until it cracked. 63. Every year showed up in the morning, reminded him that the body kept receipts for every stupid thing the mind decided to do. He walked to the trailer, boots crunching on gravel. No doorbell. He knocked, waited. Nothing. Knocked again, harder this time. The door opened. The man who filled the doorway was younger than Clayton by 15 years, maybe more. 6'4", 240, most of it muscle. Bald head, thick neck, a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, the kind of scar that came from a knife, not an accident. He wore jeans and a black t-shirt that stretched tight across his chest. His eyes went to Clayton's face, then down to his boots, then back up. Reading him, cataloging threats, professional. Help you, the man's voice was desert dry flat. Looking for Vincent Kane. Why? We need to talk. About an old woman with a black eye. Something flickered in Kane's eyes. Recognition. Not surprised, he'd been expecting this conversation eventually. Don't know what you're talking about, Kane said. Yes, you do. They stared at each other. Two men who'd lived violent lives, who could recognize it in each other, the way sharks smell blood. Kane smiled. No humor in it. You're Steel Blackwell. Not a question. Used to be. Heard you went soft. Retired. Gave up the patch for pancakes and peace. Kane leaned against the doorframe, relaxed but ready. Guess the stories were true. Some of them. So what are you doing here, old man? Come to have a chat. Ask me nicely to leave your mommy alone. Clayton felt something cold settle in his chest. The same cold he used to feel before a fight, before violence, before the moment when talking stopped and action started. Something like that, he said quietly. Kane laughed. You got balls, I'll give you that. Walking up here alone. You know what I do for a living? I've got a pretty good idea. Then you know that old bikers who stick their noses where they don't belong tend to have accidents. Kane's eyes went hard. Understand me? I understand you put your hands on an 85-year-old woman. Business, nothing personal. It's personal now. Kane pushed off the doorframe, stepped down from the trailer. He was bigger than Clayton, younger, probably faster. Everything logic said should have made this an easy win. But logic didn't account for 30 years of street fights. Didn't account for the lessons learned in blood and broken bones. Didn't account for what happened when you threatened the one thing a man had left to protect. You want to do this here? Kane asked, looking around the trailer park. In front of witnesses. Rather do it inside. Private. Yeah, Kane grinned. Come on in then. He turned and walked back into the trailer. Every instinct Clayton had screamed trap, ambush, weapon inside. He followed anyway. The trailer's interior was sparse, couch, TV, kitchen area that looked like it had never been used. No pictures on the walls, no personal items, the space of a man who didn't plan to stay long, or didn't plan to leave anything behind when he left. Kane turned to face him. So, you want to know about the old lady? I want to know who's paying you, who's behind Crimson Development, and if I don't feel like sharing, then I'll ask less politely. Kane laughed again, but this time it was genuine. Jesus, you got sand. I'll give you that. He crossed his arms. But here's the thing, old man. You're 20 years past your prime. I'm in mine. You really think you can take me? Yes. The confidence in that single word made Kane pause. Huh, he said. Maybe you're not as soft as I thought. The woman you hit, Rosie Blackwell, she's never hurt anyone in her life, never broken a law, just runs a diner, makes pancakes, minds her business. And she's sitting on prime real estate that my employers want. Refused a fair offer. Refused multiple fair offers. Kane shrugged. At some point, stubbornness becomes a business problem. So you beat her? I encouraged her to reconsider. There's a difference. Clayton's hands curled into fists. Who do you work for? You really want to know? Yes. Kane studied him for a long moment. Then he walked to the kitchen area, opened a drawer, pulled out a business card. He held it up. Crimson Development LLC, Dalton McGraw, Jr. CEO, office in Phoenix. Very legitimate, very legal. Kane set the card on the counter. They buy properties for development. Sometimes property owners need convincing. That's where I come in. McGraw, Clayton repeated. The name hit him like a fist. Dalton McGraw Jr., Razor's son. It couldn't be. Razor Dalton McGraw Sr. had been VP of the Tucson chapter back in the day. Solid brother. Reliable. Got out the same time Clayton did, moved to Nevada, went straight. His son was a lawyer, last Clayton heard. Real estate law. Clean. Legitimate. You know him? Kane asked, watching Clayton's face. I know his father. Yeah, well, Junior's nothing like Daddy. Junior's ambitious, smart, knows how to make money in ways the old man never dreamed of. Kane smiled. And he pays well for results. How much did he pay you to hit my mother? $5,000, plus expenses. $5,000. That's what his mother's pain was worth. $5,000 in expenses. Clayton moved before thought caught up with action. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, grabbed Kane by the throat, slammed him back against the refrigerator. The whole trailer shook. Kane's eyes went wide with surprise, then calculation. His hands shot up, broke Clayton's grip with a practice move. His other hand came around in a hook aimed at Clayton's jaw. Clayton ducked, felt the punch whistle past his ear. He drove his shoulder into Kane's midsection, used his weight. His momentum pushed the bigger man back. They crashed into the kitchen table. Wood splintered. Kane brought his elbow down on Clayton's back. Pain exploded across his spine. 63-year-old vertebrae protesting the sudden violence. Clayton rolled away, came up in a crouch. Kane was already on his feet, breathing hard, a grin spreading across his scarred face. There we go, Kane said. There's the steel I heard about. They circled each other in the cramped trailer. Kane was younger, stronger trained. Prison training probably. Maybe military before that. He moved like a man who knew how to hurt people efficiently. But Clayton had something Kane didn't. 30 years of fighting men who wanted to kill him. 30 years of learning that speed mattered less than timing. That strength mattered less than knowing exactly where to put your weight. Kane lunged through a combination jab cross hook. Clayton stepped inside the range too close for the punches to land with power. He grabbed Kane's arm, twisted, used a judo throw he'd learned from a Japanese biker in 1987. Kane went down hard, the trailer shaking again. But he rolled with it, came up fast, grabbed a kitchen chair, swung it at Clayton's head. Clayton ducked the chair, whistling overhead. He stepped in, drove his fist into Kane's solar plexus. Not hard, just precise, hitting the nerve cluster that made the diaphragm seize. Kane's breath left him in a whoosh. Clayton swept his legs. Kane went down again this time, staying down, gasping for air. Clayton put his boot on Kane's chest, just enough pressure to keep him there. $5,000, Clayton said, his breathing barely elevated. That's what my mother's black eye cost your boss. Kane stared up at him, still fighting for air, and something like respect flickered in his eyes. Jesus, Kane wheezed. They said you were retired. I am. Doesn't look retired. Some things you don't forget. Clayton pressed down slightly with his boot. The people who hired you, McGraw. What's the real play here? I told you. Casino resort. There's more. There's always more. Kane coughed, got some air back. You're right. There's more. The casino's just the front. Keep talking. McGraw's got investors. Big money. Foreign money. Chinese, Russian, I don't know. They want to clean their cash, make it legitimate. Casino's perfect for that. Money laundering, of course. How many properties does he need? All of them. The whole downtown block. He's got 8 out of 9. Kane looked up at Clayton. Your mother's diner is the last piece. Without it, the whole deal falls apart. The investors walk. McGraw loses everything. How much is everything? $800 million. Clayton felt the number settle in his gut like lead. 800 million. And his mother's 40-year-old diner stood in the way. So he sent you to convince her, Clayton said. He sent me to close the deal, however necessary. By beating an old woman. By doing my job, Kane's eyes hardened. You want to judge me? Go ahead. But we're not that different, you and me. We both did what we had to do to survive. We're nothing alike. No. You think the people you hurt in the old days, the people you beat, the bones you broke for the Hells Angels, you think they deserved it any more than your mother deserved this? The words hit harder than the punches had, because Kane was right. Clayton had done terrible things in his life, hurt people who didn't deserve it. Broken families ruined lives, all in service of the club of brotherhood, of a code that seemed important at the time, but looked hollow in hindsight. He'd spent 16 years trying to atone, and in one morning he was right back in it. Clayton stepped back, let Kane sit up. What happens now? Kane asked, rubbing his throat. Now you're going to tell me everything you know about McGraw's operation. Names, locations, who else is on his payroll. And if I don't, then I call the sheriff. You get arrested for assault. You do time. And while you're inside, I make sure every biker in the Arizona prison system knows you put your hands on my mother. Kane went pale. He knew what that meant. Prison was its own world with its own rules. And bikers, even retired ones, had long memories. You'd do that, without hesitation. They stared at each other. Then Kane started talking. 20 minutes later, Clayton walked out of the trailer with a phone full of photos, documents Kane had kept as insurance names, bank accounts, communications between McGraw and his investors. Everything needed to bring the whole operation down. Kane stood in the doorway holding his ribs. You broke something, he said. Be grateful that's all I broke. What happens to me? Clayton looked back at him. You're going to leave Copper Ridge. Tonight, you're going to disappear, and you're never going to work for McGraw again. He'll come after me. Probably. But that's your problem now. Clayton mounted his Harley. You put your hands on my mother. The fact that you're still breathing is more mercy than you deserve. He started the engine, let it rumble. Steele, Kane called out. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About your mother. Clayton didn't answer. He rode away from the trailer park, the morning sun climbing higher, the heat building towards something unbearable. His phone rang as he hit Main Street. He pulled over, answered. Steele, Razor's voice tight with urgency. I got your information on Crimson Development. You're not going to like it. I already know, Clayton said. It's your son. Silence on the other end, then quiet. What? Dalton Jr. He's the one behind it all. That's not possible. My son's a lawyer. Real estate. He's legitimate. He's Dirty Razor, using the firm as a front for money laundering. 800 million in foreign investment running through a casino development deal. More silence. Jesus Christ, Razor finally said, his voice breaking. I didn't know. Steele, I swear I didn't know. I believe you. What are we going to do? We, Clayton asked. You think I'm going to let my son destroy lives, hurt old women? He's my blood, but that doesn't mean I'm going to protect him when he's wrong. Razor's voice hardened. I'm coming down there, tonight, whatever you need. Bring the brothers, the old crew, anyone who's still alive and still gives a damn. How many? As many as you can find. What's the play? Clayton looked down Main Street at Rosie's diner, glowing warm in the distance at the town he'd called home for 16 years. We're going to remind Dalton McGraw Jr. what happens when you mess with family, he said. The old-fashioned way. He ended the call. The ride back to his garage took 10 minutes. The building sat at the edge of town, corrugated metal big enough for 4 bike stools, covering every wall. His sanctuary for 16 years, the place where he'd rebuilt engines and rebuilt himself. Inside, the air smelled like oil and metal and honest work. Clayton went to the back office, pulled out a laptop he rarely used, downloaded the photos from his phone, started going through Kane's documents, building a case. He worked for 2 hours compiling everything: bank transfers, property deeds, communications between McGraw and shell companies in Shanghai and Moscow. Enough evidence to bury the whole operation, enough to send Dalton McGraw Jr. to prison for 20 years. But prison took time. Courts, lawyers, months or years of fighting while his mother lived in fear. Clayton had promised himself 16 years ago that he was done with shortcuts, done with solving problems with his fists. But that promise had been made in a different time to a different version of himself. The version that hadn't seen his mother's bruised face. His phone buzzed. Text from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Blackwell? We need to talk. Regarding your mother's property, tonight, 9 p.m., my office in Phoenix. Come alone. This is your one chance to resolve things peacefully. D. McGraw. Clayton stared at the message. An invitation. Or a trap. Probably both. He typed back, I'll be there. 3 dots appeared. Then, smart man. Clayton set the phone down, looked around his garage. At the life he'd built, the peace he'd found. All of it balanced on a knife's edge now. He could go to the FBI with the evidence. Could let the law handle it. Wade had already confessed his involvement. That was enough to start an investigation. The safe way. The smart way. The way that might take months while his mother jumped at every shadow while Kane or someone like him came back to finish the job. Or he could go to Phoenix tonight. Could face McGraw directly. Could end this the way he used to end things, fast, brutal, permanent. The dangerous way. The stupid way. The way that felt right in his bones. Clayton walked to the corner of the garage where a locked cabinet sat covered in dust. He hadn't opened it in 16 years. The key was in his wallet tucked behind his license. He unlocked the cabinet. Inside, wrapped in plastic, his old cut. The leather vest with the Hells Angels patch on the back. President Rocker. Tucson chapter. The uniform of the man he used to be. Next to it, the Colt 1911. His father's gun. Cleaned, oiled, maintained, even though he swore he'd never fire it again. Clayton reached for the gun. His hand stopped halfway. 16 years of peace. 16 years of being someone different. All thrown away for revenge. Was it worth it? He thought of his mother's face. The fear in her eyes. The way her hands shook when she tried to pour coffee. Yes, it was worth it. Clayton took the gun, checked the action. Muscle memory from 50 years of handling firearms. Still smooth. Still ready. He found a box of ammunition, loaded a magazine. Then he stood there, gun in hand, staring at his reflection in the chrome of a motorcycle gas tank. 63 years old. Gray hair, lines around his eyes, the face of a man who'd earned his peace. About to throw it all away. His phone rang again. Not a text this time. A call. Sheriff Wade. Clayton answered. Steele, we need to talk. Wade's voice was tight. I just got a call from Phoenix PD. They're asking questions about Crimson Development. About me. Good. Good, Steele. If this goes public, I'm finished. My career, my pension, everything. You should have thought of that before you sold out your town. I know I screwed up, but... Wade paused. But there's something you need to know about McGraw. I'm listening. The casino deal. It's bigger than money laundering. There's a trafficking component. Clayton's blood went cold. What kind of trafficking? People. Young women from overseas. The casino's going to be a front for that, too. That's why the foreign investors are so eager. Wade's voice shook. Steele, I didn't know about that part. I swear I didn't know. If I'd known. But you didn't ask, Clayton said. You just took the money. I'm asking now. What are you going to do? What I should have done 16 years ago. Which is, end it. Clayton hung up. He stood in his garage, gun in hand, the weight of it familiar and terrible. Trafficking. Not just money laundering. Not just property development. Human trafficking. And his mother's diner stood in the way of an $800 million operation that sold human beings like cattle. The anger in Clayton's chest wasn't hot anymore. Wasn't the young man's rage that burned quick and bright. This was the cold fury of an old man who'd seen too much, done too much, and had finally found a line he couldn't cross. They'd crossed it for him. Clayton put the gun in his jacket, grabbed his keys. He had 9 hours until the meeting in Phoenix. 9 hours to decide if he was going to be smart or stupid. 9 hours to choose between the man he'd become and the man he used to be. Outside, the sun beat down on Copper Ridge, merciless and bright. Inside Clayton's chest, something dark and old unfurled itself, stretched, remembered what it felt like to hunt. He walked to his Harley, started the engine. The sound echoed down the street, loud and rough and full of promise. A promise that had been sleeping for 16 years. A promise that was wide awake now. And when Clayton Blackwell made a promise, whether with words or with violence, he always kept it. He rode toward Phoenix, toward Dalton McGraw Jr., toward a reckoning that had been building since the moment someone put their hands on his mother. The desert stretched out before him, endless and unforgiving. Just like his memory. Just like his resolve. Behind him, Copper Ridge sat peaceful in the afternoon sun. But the town was about to learn something it had forgotten in 16 years of quiet. Steele Blackwell had retired from the Hells Angels, but he'd never retired from protecting what was his. And God help anyone who forgot the difference. Phoenix rose from the desert like a fever dream, all glass and steel and ambition clawing at a sky that didn't care. Clayton hit the city limits at 7:32 hours before the meeting, the Harley's engine hot from the 100-mile ride. He needed information before he walked into McGraw's office. Needed to know the layout, the security, the exits. 16 years of peace hadn't made him stupid. The address McGraw had sent led to a high-rise downtown. 30 floors of reflective glass, the kind of building that screamed money and power, and lawyers who billed by the minute. Clayton circled the block twice, cataloging camera security posts, the loading dock and back. Professional setup, the kind of place where a 63-year-old biker would stand out like a rattlesnake in a kindergarten. Good. Let them see him coming. He parked 3 blocks away, walked back. The evening heat pressed down like a hand, the pavement radiating warmth, even as the sun dropped toward the horizon. His phone buzzed. Razor. I'm 2 hours out, Razor said without preamble. Got 6 brothers with me. Old crew. We're armed and we're pissed. Don't come to Phoenix, Clayton said. Not yet. The hell you said you needed backup? I do, but not here. Not now. Clayton watched the building's entrance, counting security guards. 3 visible, probably more inside. If this goes wrong, I need you clean. Need you ready to take care of my mother. Silence on the other end. Then still you, planning on not coming back? I'm planning on everything. My son's in there, Dalton. I should be the one. Your son's the reason you can't be here, Clayton said quietly. You go in there, you won't be able to do what needs doing. Blood's too thick. And you can... I don't have a choice. Razor was quiet for a long moment. You're going to kill him, aren't you, my boy? No, I'm going to give him a chance to do the right thing. And if he doesn't... Clayton watched a black sedan pull up to the building's entrance. 2 men in suits got out, moved like they carried weight under their jackets. Security. Expensive security. Then I'll do what I came here to do, he said, which is end this, one way or another. He hung up before Razor could argue. 8:15. 45 minutes until the meeting. Clayton found a diner 2 blocks over, the kind of place that served coffee that tasted like regret and pie that made up for it. He ordered both, sat in a booth by the window where he could see the street. The waitress was maybe 30 tired eyes, a look of someone working 3 jobs and still coming up short. She refilled his coffee without being asked. Rough day, she asked. Long one. Yeah, I know that feeling. She glanced at his cut he'd put it on before leaving Copper Ridge, the Hells Angels patch displayed like a battle flag. You in town for a rally or something? Business. Huh, didn't know bikers did business in suits and ties territory. She smiled, but it was sad around the edges. Be careful out there. This part of town, the suits are meaner than the streets. I'll keep that in mind. She walked away and Clayton sat there drinking coffee that was better than it had any right to be, watching the sun paint Phoenix in shades of orange and purple, thinking about choices. He could still walk away, could send the evidence to the FBI, let them handle it. His mother would be scared for a while, but Kane was gone, and without him, McGraw would have to find someone new to do his dirty work. That bought time, the smart play. But smart didn't account for the rage that lived in Clayton's chest like a second heartbeat. Didn't account for the fact that Dalton McGraw Jr. had looked at an 85-year-old woman and decided she was an acceptable casualty in his $800 million scheme. Some things couldn't be settled in courtrooms. Clayton paid his bill, left a $20 tip on a $10 check. The waitress called after him. Hey, that's too much. No, it's not, he said, and walked out into the Phoenix evening. The building's lobby was all marble and chrome, the kind of aggressive opulence that existed to make visitors feel small. A security desk sat front and center, manned by 2 guards in blazers that didn't quite hide their shoulder holsters. Clayton walked up, boots loud on the polished floor. The younger guard, maybe 30, military haircut, the look of someone who took the job seriously, stood up. Help you? I'm here to see Dalton McGraw, 9th floor. Name, Clayton Blackwell. The guard checked a tablet, nodded. You're expected, but I need to check you for weapons first. Clayton spread his arms. The guard ran a wand over him, stopped when it beeped at his jacket. You carrying? Yes. The guard's hand went to his holster. Sir, you can't bring a weapon into the building. Then Mr. McGraw is going to be disappointed. He wanted this meeting. These are my terms. The older guard, 50, soft around the middle, the look of someone who'd seen enough trouble to recognize it, put a hand on his partner's shoulder. He studied Clayton for a long moment. You're Steele Blackwell, the older guard said. Not a question. Used to be. Heard about you, back in the day. The guard's eyes went to the patch on Clayton's cut. You know we could call the cops. Have you arrested for carrying concealed without a permit? You could, but you don't think we will. I think Mr. McGraw wants this conversation more than he wants me in handcuffs. The guards looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them. The older guard picked up a phone, spoke quietly. Listen. Hung up. Ninth floor, suite 900. You cause any trouble, we've got 6 more guys upstairs who won't be as polite as us. Understood. Clayton walked to the elevators, pressed the button for 9. The doors closed and he was alone with his reflection in the polished brass. 63 years old, gray hair pulled back, the cut hanging heavy on his shoulders, patches and pins from a life he'd walked away from. He looked like exactly what he was, a relic, a ghost, a man out of time. But ghosts could still bite. The elevator opened on the 9th floor, thick carpet recess lighting the smell of expensive wood and expensive lawyers. Suite 900 sat at the end of the hall, double doors of dark mahogany. Clayton walked to them, knocked once. Come in. He pushed the doors open. The office beyond was huge, probably bigger than his entire garage. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Phoenix, the city lights starting to glow as dust settled. Leather furniture, original art on the walls. A desk that cost more than most people's cars. Behind the desk sat Dalton McGraw Jr., 40 years old, maybe less. Good-looking in that polished way that came from expensive gyms and expensive dentists. Tailored suit, probably Italian. Haircut and styled to look casual in a way that wasn't. He looked nothing like his father. Razor had been a big man, rough around the edges, the kind of guy who looked like he'd been carved from stone and left in the weather to age. Hard hands, hard eyes, hard life. His son looked like he'd never worked a hard day in his life, but the eyes were sharp, calculating. Standing beside the desk was another man. Older, mid-60s, silver hair, 3-piece suit. The kind of presence that filled a room without trying. Mr. Blackwell, Dalton said, standing offering a hand across the desk. Thank you for coming. Clayton didn't shake, just looked at the offered hand until Dalton withdrew it. This is Richard Beaumont, Dalton said, gesturing to the older man. My senior partner. Mr. Blackwell. Beaumont's voice was cultured East Coast money. We've heard a great deal about you. I doubt that. No, really. Your reputation precedes you. Former president of the Hells Angels Tucson chapter. Quite the resume. Beaumont smiled, but it was the smile of a shark. Though I understand you've been retired for some time. 16 years. Yet here you are, wearing the cut, carrying a weapon into a business meeting. Beaumont's eyes glittered. One might wonder if retirement agreed with you. One might wonder why you're beating old women to steal their property. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Dalton sat back down, steepled his fingers. Mr. Blackwell, let's be clear about something. Your mother was offered fair market value for her property. More than fair, actually. She refused. She has that right. She does, absolutely, Dalton nodded. But she also has to understand that her refusal has consequences. Economic consequences. The development we're planning would bring jobs, revenue growth to Copper Ridge. Her stubbornness is standing in the way of progress. Progress! Clayton's voice was flat. That what you're calling it? What would you call it? Money laundering, human trafficking, corruption. Clayton pulled out his phone, set it on the desk. I've got evidence, bank transfers, communications with shell companies in Shanghai and Moscow. Documents showing exactly what your casino's really going to be used for. Dalton glanced at the phone, then back at Clayton. His expression didn't change. Interesting, he said. And you got this evidence how? From Vincent Kane, before I convinced him to leave town. Convinced, Beaumont smiled. Is that what the kids are calling assault these days? He put his hands on my mother. He got off light. Dalton picked up Clayton's phone, scrolled through the photos. His face remained calm, professional. When he finished, he set the phone down. Well, he said, this is unfortunate. Unfortunate. Yes. You see, Mr. Blackwell, you've done something very stupid. Dalton walked to the window, looked out over Phoenix. You've collected evidence of a criminal conspiracy. You've assaulted one of my employees, and you've walked into my office wearing a gun and making threats. I haven't threatened anyone. Not yet, but we both know that's why you're here. Dalton turned back to face him. You want me to leave your mother alone? Want me to drop the development deal? Walk away from $800 million because you say so? Yes. Dalton laughed, actually laughed. The ball's on you. I'll give you that. Your father would be ashamed. That wiped the smile off Dalton's face. My father, he said, at voice going cold, is a has-been biker who pissed away his life riding motorcycles and pretending brotherhood mattered more than money. He's got nothing. Lives in a trailer in Nevada fixing bikes for weekend warriors who want to pretend they're tough. Your father's got something you'll never have. What's that? Honor. Dalton stared at him. Then he started laughing again, and this time Beaumont joined in. Honor, Dalton repeated. Jesus Christ, you sound like my old man. All that Hell's Angels code bullshit. Brotherhood, loyalty, honor among thieves. He shook his head. You know what honor gets you, Mr. Blackwell, poor? That's what it gets you. Your father's rich in ways you can't count. And I'm rich in ways that actually matter. Dalton leaned against his desk. Here's how this works. You're going to leave Phoenix tonight. You're going to delete those photos. And you're going to convince your mother to sell her property to Crimson Development within the next 7 days. And if I don't, then Vincent Kane was just the opening act. Dalton's voice was perfectly pleasant. I have resources, Mr. Blackwell. People who make Kane look like a Sunday school teacher. People who could make your mother disappear and make it look like she wandered off confused old woman with dementia. Clayton felt his hands curl into fists. You're threatening to kill my mother. I'm explaining the reality of the situation. Dalton spread his hands. Business is business. Sometimes people get hurt. That's regrettable, but it's the cost of progress. The cost of your greed. Call it what you want. Dalton walked back around his desk, sat down. You have 7 days. After that, I can't guarantee her safety. Clayton looked at him, this smooth, polished man who'd never known a hungry day in his life, who'd grown up with every advantage, every opportunity, and had chosen to use them to prey on the weak. Razor's son. The apple hadn't just fallen far from the tree. It had rolled into a different orchard entirely. No, Clayton said quietly. Excuse me. I said no. My mother's not selling. And you're not going to touch her again. Beaumont stepped forward. Mr. Blackwell, I don't think you understand the gravity. I understand fine. Clayton's voice was still quiet, still calm, but underneath it was something that made both men go still. What you don't understand is this. I spent 30 years doing terrible things, hurt people, broke people, all for a patch in a brotherhood, in a code that seemed important at the time. He took a step toward the desk. I spent the last 16 years trying to be different, trying to be better, trying to prove that a man can change. Another step. But standing here listening to you threaten my mother. Clayton's eyes went flat and cold. I'm starting to think maybe I was wrong. Maybe some people need the old me, the one who solved problems with his fists. You're threatening us. Beaumont's hand went inside his jacket. In our own office. I'm explaining reality. Your words. Clayton looked at Dalton. You've got resources, so do I. 6 brothers from the old days, all of them meaner than you could imagine. All of them owe me favors. All of them would love an excuse to show a spoiled rich kid what real violence looks like. You think we're scared of geriatric bikers? Dalton sneered. No, I think you're scared of prison, and I've got enough evidence on that phone to put you there for 20 years. Evidence that you obtained illegally. That would be thrown out of any court. Maybe, but it'd be enough to start an investigation. Enough to freeze your assets. Scare off your investors. Clayton smiled, and it was not a kind expression. How long you think those Chinese and Russian friends of yours will stick around once the FBI starts asking questions? Silence filled the office. Dalton and Beaumont exchanged glances. You're bluffing, Dalton said finally. Am I? Clayton pulled out his phone, made a show of opening his email. One button, that's all it takes. One button and everything on this phone goes to the FBI Phoenix office, the Arizona Attorney General, and every major newspaper in the state. His finger hovered over the screen. Your move. The silence stretched out thick and heavy. Then Beaumont moved. His hand came out of his jacket holding a small revolver, the kind lawyers kept for protection, snub-nosed and discreet. Put the phone down, Beaumont said. Clayton didn't move. You're going to shoot me in your own office with security cameras, witnesses downstairs. We'll say you attacked us, came in armed, made threats, self-defense. Beaumont's hand was steady. Your criminal record will back up our story. My record's clean, has been for 16 years. Once a thug, always a thug. That's what the jury will hear. Clayton looked at the gun. Small caliber, probably a .38. It could kill him, sure, but Beaumont didn't hold it like a man comfortable with violence. Held it like a prop, something to make threats with. The old Clayton Steele Blackwell wouldn't have hesitated, would have moved disarmed, broken bones before Beaumont could pull the trigger. But he'd promised himself 16 years ago, no more violence, no more being that man, even when that man was needed. Put the gun away, Clayton said tiredly. Nobody needs to die tonight. You're right, nobody does, as long as you delete those photos and walk away. Clayton's finger was still over the send button. One press. That's all it would take. End this. Bring down the whole operation. Save his mother, save Copper Ridge, save God knew how many trafficking victims. One press, but Beaumont had a gun, and even a lawyer could hit a target at 10 feet. Clayton would die. The evidence would die with him, and McGraw would still come after his mother, except now he'd be motivated by revenge instead of just business. Checkmate. Clayton lowered his phone, opened the photo app, selected all the images. His finger hovered over delete. Dalton smiled. Smart man. Am I? Clayton pressed delete. The photos vanished. Beaumont lowered the gun relief crossing his face. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell, Dalton said. I knew we could reach an understanding. Now about your mother's property. I lied, Clayton said. Dalton blinked. What? When I said I had 6 brothers. I've got 8, and I already sent them the evidence this afternoon. Uploaded to a cloud server with instructions. If I don't check in by midnight, everything goes to the authorities automatically. The color drained from Dalton's face. You're bluffing. That's what you said last time. Clayton picked up his phone, pocketed it. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to dissolve Crimson Development. You're going to return every property you bought to the original owners. And you're going to turn yourself in to the FBI. Like hell. Or at midnight, the evidence goes public. And not just to the authorities, to your investors, those Chinese and Russian friends who don't like complications. Clayton headed for the door. Wonder what they'll do when they find out you compromised an $800 million deal by keeping evidence on your enforcer's phone? Beaumont raised the gun again. Stop. Clayton stopped, looked back over his shoulder. You won't make it out of this building, Beaumont said. We'll call security. Have you arrested? On what charge? I haven't broken any laws tonight. You're carrying a concealed weapon without a permit. Arizona's an open carry state. I can carry any weapon I want as long as it's visible. Clayton tapped his cut where the gun's outline was clearly visible. And it is. He opened the door. Wait, Dalton said. His voice had lost its arrogance. Wait, we can work something out. Name your price. 50,000, 100. You think I want money? Everyone wants money. No, everyone wants to live with themselves. I spent 16 years learning how to do that. Clayton looked at Dalton McGraw Jr., this spoiled, polished man who'd never known want or need or honor, and felt something like pity. You should try it sometime, before it's too late. He walked out. Behind him, he heard Dalton's voice, high and panicked. You think you've won? You think this is over? I'll come after you. I'll come after everyone you love. Clayton didn't answer. Just walked to the elevator, pressed the button, waited. The doors opened. Sheriff Wade Thornton stood inside, flanked by 2 FBI agents. Steele, Wade said quietly. We need to talk. Clayton looked at him, at the badge that Wade had somehow kept despite his confession, at the shame in his old friend's eyes. You wearing a wire? Clayton asked. Yeah, have been since you called me this afternoon. Get everything? Every word. Wade stepped out of the elevator. The FBI is going to want your evidence too. Already sent it. Check your email. Wade's phone buzzed. He looked at it, then back at Clayton. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just do your job. The FBI agents moved past Clayton, heading for Dalton's office. One of them spoke into a radio. We're going in. Alert building security. Clayton and Wade stood in the hallway listening to the sounds of shouting of Beaumont's protests of Dalton demanding his lawyer. How'd you know I'd do the right thing? Wade asked. Didn't. Took a chance. Some chance. If I hadn't shown up, then I had a backup plan. Wade almost smiled. You always were 3 steps ahead. 4, actually. But who's counting? They stood there in silence as the FBI led Dalton and Beaumont out in handcuffs, their protests echoing down the hallway. Dalton saw Clayton. You're dead, you hear me? You're a dead man. Clayton didn't respond, just watched as they dragged him into the elevator, the doors closing on Dalton's rage. What happens now? Wade asked. Now you go back to Copper Ridge. You tell the town what happened. You face the consequences of what you did. I'll lose my job. Probably do time. Probably. Wade nodded slowly. And you? I'm going home. Going to see my mother. Tell her she's safe. And after that, Clayton thought about it. About the evidence that would bring down an $800 million empire. About the women who'd be saved from trafficking. about the town that would stay whole, about the price of doing the right thing. After that, Clayton said, I'm going to make pancakes. 3 hours later, Clayton walked into Rosie's diner. Midnight. The place should have been closed, but the lights were on. His mother stood behind the counter pouring coffee for 8 men ranging from 60 to 70 years old. Men with silver hair and hard eyes, and patches on their cuts that said they'd ridden with the Hells Angels back when it meant something. Razor stood when Clayton walked in, came around the counter. The 2 men looked at each other. It's done, Clayton said. Razor's eyes filled with tears. My son. In custody. He'll do time. I'm sorry. Razor nodded slowly. Then he pulled Clayton into a hug, and both men stood there, 60-something bikers, holding each other up, while the weight of choices and consequences and blood settled around them. You did right, Razor said finally. He made his choice. Now he pays the price. They broke apart. Rosie came around the counter, moving easier now, the bruises fading to yellow and green. She looked at her son, at the men who'd come when he called at the family he'd built from brotherhood instead of blood. You boys hungry? She asked. Starving, one of the old bikers said. Good, sit down. I'll make pancakes. And for the next 2 hours, that's what she did. Made pancakes for aging bikers who'd ridden through the night to help one of their own. Poured coffee and told stories and laughed at jokes that weren't that funny but didn't need to be. Clayton sat at the counter, his coffee getting cold, watching his mother work. She caught his eye, smiled. He smiled back. Outside, dawn was breaking over Copper Ridge, painting the desert in shades of gold. Inside, for the first time in days, everything was warm. A week later, Dalton McGraw Jr. was arraigned on 73 counts ranging from money laundering to racketeering to conspiracy to commit human trafficking. Bail was set at $20 million. He couldn't make it. Wade Thornton resigned as sheriff, pleaded guilty to corruption charges, received 2 years suspended sentence and 5,000 hours of community service. Vincent Kane was found in Mexico. Extradited, cut a deal with the FBI in exchange for testimony. Crimson Development dissolved. The 8 properties it had purchased were returned to their original owners at the purchase price plus 15%. And Rosie's diner stayed exactly where it had been for 40 years, standing, stubborn, undefeated. Clayton stood outside the diner on a Sunday morning, watching the sunrise. The Harley sat beside him, engine ticking as it cooled. He wasn't wearing the cut anymore, had put it back in the cabinet, locked it away. He'd needed it for a moment, for the reminder of who he used to be, what he was capable of. But he didn't need it anymore. Wasn't Steele Blackwell, wasn't the president of anything except his own garage, his own life, his own choices. He was just Clayton, and that was enough. The diner door opened. Rosie stepped out, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She gave one to Clayton, kept the other. They stood together, mother and son, sipping coffee and watching the desert wake up. You know what I realized, Rosie said finally? What's that, Ma? For 16 years, I thought you retired from violence because you were tired of it. I was. But that's not the whole truth, is it? She looked at him, her eyes clear and knowing. You retired because you were good at it. Too good. And you were scared of what would happen if you ever started again. Clayton didn't answer. You were right to be scared, Rosie continued, because when you started again, when you went after McGraw, it was like you never stopped. All that skill, all that danger still there. Just sleeping. Ma, but here's what I also realized. She touched his arm. You stopped. When it was done, when the threat was over, you stopped. Hung up the cut. Came back to being my son. She smiled. That's strength, Clayton. Real strength. Not the fighting, the stopping. They stood in silence. Your father would be proud, Rosie said quietly. He'd probably think I was an idiot for risking my life at 63. Well, that too, she laughed, but mostly proud. Inside the diner, Clayton could hear the old crew getting rowdy. Razor and the brothers arguing about something stupid the way old men do when they got nothing better to fight about. Come on, Rosie said, before they break something. They walked inside together. And for the first time in his life, Clayton Blackwell felt something he'd never felt before. Not when he was president of the Hells Angels. Not when he was feared by men twice his size. Not when he had power and respect and a reputation that made strong men nervous. He felt peace, real peace. The kind that came from knowing he'd protected what mattered, from knowing he'd been tested and hadn't broken, from knowing that when violence called his name, he'd answered, but only long enough to end the threat and not a moment longer. He'd been Steele Blackwell for 30 years. He'd been Clayton for 16. And for 1 week in between, he'd been both. Now he could be just Clayton again. just a son who protected his mother, just a man who made the right choices when it mattered, just someone who understood that strength wasn't in the fists or the anger or the willingness to hurt. It was in knowing when to fight and when to put down the weapons and walk away. Clayton poured himself another cup of coffee, sat at the counter beside Razor. "Your boy's going to do hard time," he said quietly. "I know," Razor stared into his cup. "But at least he's alive. At least there's a chance he'll learn something." "There's always a chance. Is there for men like us, men who did what we did?" Clayton thought about it. About 16 years of trying to be better. About the moment he put the gun in his jacket, ready to become the monster again. About the fact that he'd stopped before crossing the line. "Yeah," he said finally, "there's always a chance, as long as we keep trying." Razor nodded slowly, raised his coffee cup. "To second chances." Clayton raised his. "To second chances." They drank. And in the warm light of Rosie's diner, surrounded by brothers who'd ridden through the night when he called Clayton, Blackwell understood something fundamental about himself. He wasn't defined by his worst moments. He was defined by what he did after them. The sun climbed higher over Copper Ridge. The desert spread out endless and unforgiving. But inside the diner, there was warmth. There was family. There was home. And sometimes that was all a man needed. Sometimes that was everything.